Hey guys, coming with me another movie review for you guys, continuing my 31 days of horror movie reviews, and we are down to the final 5 movies, guys. I mean, pretty crazy, but Halloween is tomorrow, and I'm going to be reviewing 3 movies tomorrow, and then one more probably tonight, probably one more. Can't quote me on that, but probably I will be doing that. But this movie that I'm going to be reviewing is the oldest film I will review. And probably the oldest film I've ever reviewed on this channel, probably ever. But I'll tell you guys why I wanted to watch this movie, and that movie is the 1922 silent horror classic Nosferatu. Now, Nosferatu. Most people probably would have picked. If you guys know, first of all, Phantom of the Opera, of course, I watched that. That was a silent film that I didn't expect to love as much as I did, and of course, I really loved it. That was a really great movie. It was a bit dated, but overall, I definitely really loved it. And I want to see more silent films, but that's not the reason why I chose this movie specifically. Most people probably would have chose Dracula, as the vampire, as the quintessential vampire movie. However, Nosferatu was the first vampire movie ever made, and that really made me interested because I wanted to see how much this movie inspired for other vampire movies and just horror movies in general. And especially after Phantom of the Opera, I definitely want to see another silent film. And I have to say that I made a very wise choice because not only is Nosferatu an absolute masterpiece, it's so much better than Phantom of the Opera, but I think it is one of the most quintessential iconic horror films that there is that a lot of people don't really know about. It kind of sucks that a lot of people don't know about this movie. You probably have never even heard of this movie if you're not like a really big into like films and things like that. You probably never heard of it, unfortunately, which is too bad. I wish they'd play this movie more because I think it truly is something iconic. I have to tell you guys, I think it truly is an amazing movie that I definitely recommend you guys check out if you ever get a chance to see it. But let me get to the plot of Nosferatu. It is essentially the same plot as Dracula, but there are some differences which I will talk about. Basically, the plot of Nosferatu is that there is this we're in this town of this German city of Westberg, and there's death everywhere. People are dying. There's like a plague going on and things like that. They don't really know why this is happening, and basically Thomas Hutter, lives in this world. He and his employer Knox sends him to Transylvania to basically visit this new client named Count Orlok, who basically just saying the name Count Orlok, basically, people hate saying the name. They're worried something very bad is going to happen. So Thomas basically goes to discover what Count Orlok is all about and basically gets himself caught up in this huge thing when Count Orlok becomes a lot more than he thought he was going to be. And that basically is the plot of, Nosferatu, which I think is a really great plot. That's basically all I can say about it because there's a lot that happens to me that I can't tell you guys about, but that really is one of the reasons why I love it as much as I do. Now, one of the things I definitely was looking forward to this movie was the cast in general, because again, this is a silent film, and I really feel that acting is one of the most, important parts of a silent film, because obviously they can't talk in this movie. It was a silent film. This was before the talkies, so they had to project emotion, things like that without it, and I think for the most part, everyone did an amazing job. I have to say, everyone really was amazing. However, um, the thing, the one I was most looking forward to was Max Shrek. Now, first of all, guys, I will say the first time I heard about Nosferatu was SpongeBob. I will say that. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing we've heard of Nosferatu. You guys remember the Graveyard Shift episode, the very end with Nosferatu? I've always been fascinated by that. I've been like, what is Nosferatu about? That's another reason why I want to check this out, because of that. But for this movie, again, this was the first vampire movie ever made. This was a time when audiences weren't really aware of vampires. Sure, they might have read it in a book or whatever, but they weren't really aware of it, and I think it definitely is very interesting. And all Max Shrek really needed to do was be creepy. That's all he needed to do in this movie, was be creepy and just really sell the idea of a vampire very well. Not only did he do that, but he gave what I think is one of the most iconic performances in horror movie history as Count Orlok. Now, as you guys can tell, some things have been changed to this movie. I'll get into that when we get to the directing, but Count Orlok is one of the best horror movie characters of all time. He is so, so creepy. I mean, the second you see him, I was terrified of his character. I mean, just his appearance in general, it's very creepy, and I love that, honestly. I definitely really love that about his appearance. I mean, just the way he walks, the way he carries himself. It's awesome, and he doesn't have a single line of dialogue in this movie. Count Orlok never has a single line of dialogue, and I love that, and I think he did a great job with that, and he really encapsulated the idea of a vampire perfectly. I mean, he really gives off that creepy vibe. Obviously, he likes to suck blood, he causes a lot of havoc, and he just really did all of that very, very well. And just the way he looks, I mean, any his intro in this movie is one of the most terrifying intros I've ever seen in any horror film. I mean, I was terrified when he first came up. I knew he was coming, obviously. I knew what he looked like, because, I think that's just a very iconic look, but it was terrifying, honestly. He did a very good job of that. I definitely really love that, and Max Schreck really gave an amazing performance, I have to say. And if his performance had really not been as good as it was, I don't really think vampires would be as known as they were, because his performance would have sucked and people would have been like, well, how should we care about vampires? And this shows right away why vampires are so fascinating, and he really does it all perfectly. Things like why they're afraid of garlic, the sunlight. I mean, just all the things we know of vampires, all the things you guys probably know about, how menacing they are and what they're afraid of and what can kill them. That's all in this movie, and Max Schreck handles it all perfectly. He really was amazing and really just carried this film perfectly. I mean, obviously, he is the star of this film, and he was just fantastic, I have to say. And he also gives us a really great character. I mean, Orlok is not just some vampire. He's very power hungry. He has a clear agenda. He wants to, he wants blood. That's what he wants. He wants blood. He wants power, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it. And that's something I loved about Count Orlok, especially a movie for 1922. That was a very big thing back then. I mean, obviously, audiences were probably scared out of their minds when they first saw this, definitely. I mean, just imagine I was just imagining throughout this whole movie, just being an audience member in 1922, not knowing about vampires, and this was the first thing I ever see. I would be scared out of my skull and probably not go to the movies for several months. I mean, honestly, that's probably what it'd be like for me. I think that definitely they did a very good job with that, and I really love that, I have to say. And I know that probably Dracula, is scary, but I feel like Count Orlok is just very unique because his name is Count Orlok, and I'll get into why his name is Count Orlok and things like that. Um, and he really was amazing. Now, let's not say the rest of the cast isn't amazing as well, because the rest of the cast, I think, is just as great. Gustav von Wagenham as Thomas Hutter is perfect in this movie. Again, he wasn't able to, have a lot of, obviously, he couldn't talk. There's dialogue, but he basically just moved his lips. He wasn't allowed to actually speak in this movie. So he had to project emotion, through his expressions. And Thomas Hutter really goes on emotional during this movie, obviously. I mean, you can just imagine when he goes through just meeting Count Orlok, and just the fear that he has is fantastic. I mean, when he first goes out, he doesn't really, he's not really that worried. He obviously is kind of like, okay, but he's kind of just like, you know what, this might not be that bad. But as the movie goes on, he starts to realize how powerful Count Orlok is, and his emotion really starts to get the best of him. And I think he really did a great job with that. I really cared about his character very well, and he had some really amazing moments in this movie, definitely, and he really sold it all perfectly, I have to say. And honestly, in many ways, I think he gave just as great as a performance as Max Schreck. Really, he was great in this movie, and I really thought he sold the character perfectly. My biggest surprise, though, was Greta Schroeder as Ellen Hutter. Holy shit, she was amazing. I mean, essentially, her character is just, she has this encounter with Count Orlok, and she's scared, and it changes her forever. There is that. It kind of puts her into a permanent shock, if you will. I mean, that kind of is what her character is. She's pretty much shocked throughout the rest of this movie. But I think that goes perfectly with her character because, one, it represents, obviously female characters were kind of underutilized back then, but I feel like Ellen is not underutilized at all. In fact, she kind of ends up being the hero at the end of this movie, which I'll get into. I'll get into why she's kind of like the hero, which I think is definitely very interesting. But I also really loved how, she kind of represented the audience's reaction to this. I mean, she represents the pure shock and terror that this movie really has, and I think she really did all of that perfectly. She was great. The chemistry between Gustav von Wagenham and Greta Schroeder is great. You really buy them as husband and wife. They pretty much have this perfect life, honestly. It might be a bit cheesy in the beginning, but, they really have this perfect life, and I think they really did it perfectly, and I thought they really both were fantastic. And then the only other character I'm going to talk about is Alexander Granage as Knock. Knock is a very mysterious character. There's clearly something going on with him. He has a very evil agenda, especially when he approaches Thomas to, go after Count Orlok. You can tell that he has something else up his sleeve because you find in the very beginning of the movie that he has this really evil plan. People don't really trust this guy very much, and he's kind of insane. I think he also was very creepy and really gave a very dark undertone and really went with the gothic tone of this movie very well. Everyone else in this movie was amazing. I really don't think anyone gave bad performance, and everyone really sold it perfectly, I have to say. And sure, it might have been a bit over the top, but that's kind of what these movies called for, and I can't really complain with that because that's just how it was back then. So I think they all did an amazing job. However, the most impressive thing about the movie by far is the directing by F.W. Murnau, and the screenplay as well. But I'll get into why. Now we're gonna get into some really interesting stuff with the production, which I find very fascinating. In this movie, that's something that I definitely found very interesting. With this movie is that if you guys don't know, this movie was made without getting consent or even getting the rights to Bram Stoker's original novel. They obviously wanted to get the rights, but they couldn't. Mainly because the movie was, I think, was a German film. It wasn't, wasn't American. This was a German film. It had German actors, and it got to the point where Bram Stoker's, children even considered suing them and destroying the film altogether. But what I love is that they still move forward with production. They had to change a few things, but overall, that's, I think, what separates this from other vampire movies is that their names are different. There's no Jonathan Harker, there's no Dracula, it's Count Orlok and Thomas Hutter, which I really like. It kind of makes, again, it makes it stand out as its own thing, which again, it is telling the story of Dracula, but they did make some changes, and I think F.W. Murnau really kept the tone very well. You can tell that he understood Dracula. He totally did understand the tone, and I can understand why, obviously, the children of Bram Stoker tried to sue them. Obviously, they didn't want anyone fucking with their material, probably, and didn't want anyone changing what their father had done, but I think he did a very commendable job at telling the story and really selling that dark gothic tone very well. Never is this movie not dark. The movie from the very beginning is dark. Even when there are happy things going on, you know it's going to get dark. And I think he did a very good job with that. And he wasn't afraid to have some truly shocking moments in this movie. Definitely, I was very impressed by what he did with the directing of this movie. He really was, his directing really was fantastic and one of the best things about this movie by far. I don't know what else F.W. Murnau did. I know he's a very famous German silent film director. Maybe I'll check out one of his movies again another time, but I think he definitely did a very good job here. But the screenplay, I really give it to the screenplay because, again, they had to change a lot of the names. But that didn't really change the story much. In fact, I think it made it more interesting because, again, this was the first time, if unless audiences read the Book of Dracula, the first time they ever saw this story told. And just imagine how impactful that would have been. I mean, just sitting in that theater, I can't even imagine myself sitting in a theater, not knowing anything about vampires, not knowing what the hell I'm going to see, and then seeing this movie. I can't imagine it. It's really interesting the way they did that with the screenplay. I mean, they really weren't afraid to tell some really dark shit, and I really do love that. And the movie does a really good idea of doing something that I actually don't see a lot of movies do, and I kind of wish they do that. Um, a lot of, this was at a time where you really couldn't show a lot of things in movies. Like, you couldn't show killing, you couldn't show blood, you couldn't show this stuff. It just, obviously, it would shock audiences too much. That's not something they really wanted to see back then, because movies were made, this was at a time, when movies were rare. There weren't many movies coming out. They came out every so often, but, this was just at a time when that wasn't really a common thing. So what the movie decides to do, which I think was really cool, is have narrations throughout the movie of basically them explaining in descriptive detail what happened. And I think this really makes it even the more terrifying because it gives you this really scary picture in your head. And what I also liked about that is that it keeps it from being disappointing. It keeps that scene from being disappointing. And I think that's also because of the fact they couldn't get the rights. They didn't want to butcher famous scenes from the book, so they didn't really show them. And I think that's very impressive the way that they decided to do that. I think it was definitely very well done. And that's something I definitely really love. I didn't know that going into this movie. And it's something that did bother me in the Phantom of the Opera. I will say that the narration, I think, got a bit overdone there. But here I thought it needed to happen because there were certain things we weren't seeing, and having the narration basically tell us what was going on, and giving us a great example of a show not tell. I always do say you need a show not tell. Well, this was that time when they just couldn't do that, so I can't complain about that because they could not do that. If you guys are complaining about show not tell in this movie, that's pointless because they could not show certain things in this movie. So I think it's more scary that just puts this picture in your head of what he did, especially when you think of Count Orlok's appearance. I mean, I thought of several times what that would have looked like, and it is downright terrifying, and I think they did a very good job with that. It did feel like you were watching a book sometimes, like with the narration and things like that. It really did feel like you were seeing someone read a book to you with, with scenes going on, but there were narration, and I definitely really liked that about the movie. They did a very good job of that, definitely. And it wasn't cheesy like the Phantom of the Opera was. I thought it was very subtle. The narration definitely was not too over the top. It was very subtle, and I really liked that. And it was kind of deadpan as well because they would say things like, "Oh, there's tons of death" and things like that. And it was very interesting the way they did that. And I really did love that, I have to say. Cinematography. Again, this was 1922. Not really a time, obviously, no effects at all. Not the best camera, really not the best camera. But I think this really did look great. I watched the 2006 restoration version, so I don't know how it looks on other versions, but mine looked amazing, I have to say. And especially the looks of Count Orlok is truly amazing. I don't know how the hell they did it, but that is amazing. I would love to see how Max Shrek actually looked. In fact, I'm going to see how he looked because holy shit, he looks nothing like Count Orlok. That is amazing. I mean, look at Max Shrek and then look at Count Orlok. They don't look anything the same, and I think that's very, very impressive. That's something I definitely very much command for this movie because of the fact that they got the character down to a T. The cinematography just looks amazing. You really felt like you were in the 1800s in this movie, which I love because the movie does take place in the 1800s, and I love that in this movie. And I didn't really feel the effects were dated at all. I mean, there were some things that they did here and there, but there was some stuff that I thought worked very well. I didn't really find anything dated, and I like what they did with the movie, especially with Count Orlok. I mean, it really, cinematography looked amazing, and the scenes that were supposed to be intense were intense, and that's something I loved. I was worried that the movie would look very dated, and that the movie wouldn't be that scary, but it really is. I mean, I was scared so shitless so many times throughout this movie, not knowing what was going to happen, and I love that. And again, it's mainly because I just thought of myself as being an audience member in 1922, not knowing what I was about to see, and that I think is awesome. I think that's really what we need to do with this movie, and it really will make for a much better experience, and I really do love that. Again, this movie also used color palettes. If you guys don't know, like, I don't know if that was a thing that they do with silent films, but they did with this movie as well. And I thought it worked very well, definitely. It really sold the scene very well, and I think the tone was definitely, the cinematography was kind of its own character in this movie, and I definitely really love that. And there's so many iconic shots. I mean, just Count Orlok's shadow of the stairs, obviously that's my thumbnail for this film, is truly terrifying. I mean, you're just seeing this shadow, and I love that. Also, I forgot to say, guys, in the screenplay, I love the way they build up the character of Count Orlok. We don't see him till I'd say 30 minutes into the movie, which was very good. Which was very impressive. I really like the way they did that. Um, but the way they build him up is very interesting. They really make him like this terrifying presence, and it really is satisfying, I have to say. It wasn't one of those cases where it's like, oh, that wasn't that scary. No, I was scared out of my skull watching it. Like I said, I honestly was terrified, and I think they had that down perfectly. Definitely, I was very, very impressed with cinematography, and it's something I wasn't didn't think I was going to be as impressed by, but I really loved it. Now, the score. Can't really talk about because the score I listened to, I don't think is the same score that was in 1922. However, the score was perfect. I really love the score. I know it was new. I know that they changed the score for the 2006 restoration. I know that they did that, but I think the score was amazing to this movie. I mean, especially the ending. The scenes were intense. They had the score down really, really well, I have to say. I definitely really love James Bernard is the score that I listened to, and I think the score was great. I loved it. I thought they did a great job with that, and I definitely really love that, I have to say. That's something I thought was definitely very well done, and I think they did that very well. Oh, also, I forgot to tell you guys that something about something. Now I'm reading this right now, but something about F.W. Murnau is that he actually wrote 12 additional pages of the script just so this movie could differentiate from Dracula, which I think is very impressive. Um, and especially the last scene in the film, which I will get into definitely. I definitely want to talk about. There were sketches that were to correspond exactly to each film scene, and he actually used a metronome to control the pace of the acting, which I think was very impressive and really goes. You can definitely tell that he very much cared about making this the most the most satisfying film possible. And I think they did that very well. But now I do, and also guys, the editing was perfect to this movie. I like the way it was like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. That was really cool. It felt like I was watching a stage play, and I definitely really loved that. Again, it really felt like a book when they did that, and I thought that was really cool. It felt like a stage play, but also felt like a book, and they did that very well, I have to say. I mean, they always ended the acts at exactly the right time, and this was at a time when movies weren't really that long. So Nosferatu was pretty long back then, and I really liked that they made it as long as it was. It's only 94 minutes. It's quite short, but it really went by very fast for me. But again, for audience members back then, it was long, and I think they did that very well, and I love that. Okay, so now I really want to talk about the ending of this movie, because the ending is truly something that shocked me. I did not expect the ending to go in the direction that it did, and that's something I love. The fact that F.W. Murnau wanted to change the ending of this movie, I really commend him for it, because, he could have just told a shot-for-shot remake of the original Dracula story. He could have easily done that. But then this would not be known, I think, as iconic as it was. Even though this was the first vampire movie that there was, I think people would just see it as, oh, it's just another Dracula interpretation. I think that's really what people would see it as, and it's not that at all. It's really not. In fact, I think that really goes to the last scene of this movie. Again, this was at a time when women were very underutilized in films, and that's why I think the ending is as revolutionary as it is. I mean, Ellen sacrificing herself, and especially the book. Of course, the book in this movie, I don't know if that's in the original novel. I don't know too much about the original book of Dracula. I do know some stuff, but I don't know too much about the original novel. But of course, the book. The book is one of the most impressive things about the movie, because throughout the book, they start to realize more and more about vampires, and of course, Ellen reads that the only way to kill a vampire is for the woman to distract him. Obviously, we knew from the first time that Count Orlok saw her that he wanted her blood. He wanted her blood. He wanted to kill her. He was in love with her, and well, I feel like it was more of a lust. It was a lust for blood, and that's what he wanted. And Ellen realized that she needed to give him that, so she distracted him, lured him into the sunlight, and that ended up killing her by her distracting him. He drank so much of her blood, and that was just incredible when that happened. The fact she actually did that, Ellen was the real heroine of this movie, and I love that. I mean, you think that Thomas is going to be the real, like, badass of this film, but no, Ellen is. Ellen is an awesome character, and they did that perfectly. I loved the ending, I have to say. And then when Orlok vanished in the puff of smoke, I didn't find that cheesy at all. I was worried that it was going to look really bad. It looked pretty believable. I mean, if vampires were just vanished from sunlight, I think that's probably, I mean, obviously it'd be on fire and things like that, but for, a movie from 1922, still looks pretty good now. Honestly, I thought that scene was very well done, and I definitely really love that, I have to say. When he vanished, I was disappointed, because I really love Count Orlok as a character, but of course, he needed to go. Ellen saved everyone, and just by killing herself, she saved everyone. And what I love about Thomas is that he knows he's losing her, but he knows that she's done a good thing as well, and he is never going to be the same. I mean, Thomas is completely grief-stricken. He's probably never going to be the same again, and that's something they did very well, and I love that, and I thought the ending was just perfect to that. And that last scene where they show, Count Orlok's ruined castle, in the mountains, basically shows the end of his terror, really shows how Ellen saved the town, and I absolutely love the ending. It really brought the movie full circle, and I absolutely love that. But overall, guys, Nosferatu is an absolute masterpiece. It's a movie that you definitely need to see. Again, I can understand if you don't like silent films. If you don't like silent films, you're not going to like this. It's that simple. There's not much that this movie does in terms of silent films that doesn't make it a silent film. It still is a silent film, so if you guys don't like silent films, I can totally understand that. But honestly, I found this can be completely natural. In fact, I definitely got used to it more than I did with Phantom of the Opera. Phantom of the Opera felt a bit weird, but this one definitely felt like it was a lot more, like, needed, which I could understand, definitely. But overall, guys, Nosferatu, and I'm definitely going to give Nosferatu a 5 out of 5, or an A+. By far, one of the best of the 31 Days of Horror films I've watched so far. Let me know what you guys saw this movie, have seen. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Definitely give me your thoughts on what you feel about this movie. And, of course, definitely check out this movie if you haven't. If you have seen the original Dracula, let me know how this compares, because I am going to check out Bela Lugosi's Dracula next year. I was going to watch that, but I figured I'd watch Nosferatu this year, because I just really want to see it more. And that's basically my review. Hope you enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for Homeland. Finally, I will be reviewing Homeland, and I know I'm very behind with TV reviews. I have 3 reviews to do, and I'll get them all up, so I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.